Today we are going to be speaking about Dinner at Deviant's Palace by Tim Powers, an oldie but a goodie. Now first, my name is Justin A.W. Blair. I'm a writer, I am a painter, bon vivant, they often call me, out in the streets. And I do YouTube videos also, so there's that. Big ol' book haul that I recently absconded from the library with, but not in a surreptitious manner. I simply bought a bunch of old paperbacks in the sci-fi and fantasy genre, and one of those I saw on the shelf was this. Look at this. I like the cover art. Again, I like this 80s and 90s cover art. Why do I mention that? Because this is part of a series of videos about 80s and 90s genre fiction, which I bring to you. Many of you will know already. I've covered many other books. Now, what do I want to talk about here with Tim? First thing I'd like to say about Tim Powers in general, I am a Tim Powers enjoyer. I enjoy a lot of books by Tim Powers. I haven't read all of them. Still yet to read Anubis Gate, or Gates, I'm not sure which. Maybe his most well-known book. This book came out early in his career, and he's still writing. In the, I think 85, something like that. You can look that up, check my work, check my facts. Don't take my word for it. But early on, and I believe this won the Philip K. Dick Award. Now, he had won that for Anubis Gate also. So this is an award that started, I think, in the late 70s or early 80s that focused on the best paperback novel that came out. They're still doing the award, but I don't know if anyone pays attention to it anymore. Regardless, a little bit more about Tim Powers. You may say, Tim Powers, I've never heard of him. I don't even know about him. He is a bit of a writer's writer. That being said, one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, I think the fourth one, I don't know, I've never seen any of them, was based on a novel of his called On Stranger Tides. So there's that. Other than that, yeah, he's not particularly well known. I think if you are a sci-fi fantasy fan, though, you will have heard of him, maybe read some of him. He's also a bit known for being a part of a small group. I think Blaylock is the last name of one of the guys, and Jeter, K.W. Jeter, and Tim Powers were kind of considered the beginning of steampunk. And you see that in Tim Powers. You see that a little bit in this book. You see it in a weird way. Now, I think Powers is known for steampunk because several of his books, two of which I've read, are set back in Victorian times, but with supernatural elements. I think Anubis Gates also has a time travel element to it. Again, I haven't read that one. So Tim Powers definitely aligned with the steampunk genre. But that brings us to this book, and something really interesting about this book, which is, this is again the 80s. He's writing this. This is a mashup of several different genres. At its core, it's an action-adventure narrative. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world, but that setting is the remnants of Los Angeles and Venice Beach. And so it also has, both geographically, but also in the sense of the genre itself, the elements of a Western. Why a Western? Well, you have essentially a bounty hunter that is going out to rescue a woman which he had either an affair with or he loved when he was younger. And her father is a very rich guy in this post-apocalyptic world, has power. And Rivas, the main character here, is basically a retired bounty hunter. His bounties are taking back people that have joined this cult called the Jaybirds, which has formed in the ruins of Los Angeles. There's so many different elements here, and all of them are done really well. There's also a science fiction element to it in terms of genre. That comes a little bit later in the book, because we don't really understand the science fiction implications until later on in the book. So again, what do we have here? A sci-fi Western post-apocalyptic action adventure. That's a lot of elements to try to blend together. Powers does it extremely well. But it is difficult, no matter how skilled you are as a writer, I think, to make so many different disparate elements congeal. Again, he does it really well, but it's a big task. And you see towards the latter 2/3 of the book, things do get a little bit bogged down, even though the pace of the narrative is chugging forward in terms of the action adventure. I do feel like once the science fiction element of it is introduced, there are some great scenes that come from that, and it ends up being one of the most important aspects of it. But it does somehow just weigh the entire book down a little bit. I found myself going through the first half of it really quickly, enjoying it, then getting a little bit weighed down in that 2/3 of the way through area. Then it finishes up relatively quickly, though I think that it takes a couple turns that maybe it didn't need to necessarily do. Let's talk about, I like to always throw a little writing tip into these videos, because I'm a writer. I write words. And when I read to some degree for enjoyment, but also thinking about my own writing and what I can do there, what I can take from other works, and consider none of it actually ever works. Maybe it works subconsciously, but I don't like have a list of things where I write down like, oh, this is a great idea. Now I will go through and use this element in my own writing. I don't write like that. I write in an ecstatic, shamanistic state. You understand? So I don't like long commercials in the middle of a YouTube video, so I'll get to the point quick. My own novel written by me, Justin A.W. Blair, entitled The Haunt on the Island of Esmer, is out, available on Amazon. You can buy it in ebook or paperback format. It is inspired by Malazan, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Black Company. Epic novels in that vein. Take a moment, check it out. But maybe subconsciously all that stuff works. Maybe you are more of a plotting norm of a writer, and these tips will help you. I hope they do. So the setting, a post-apocalyptic, my writer's tip of the day, a post-apocalyptic setting will develop its own vocabulary. A vocabulary will arise from the ruins in a post-apocalypse setting. I think that's very true, and I think it's done really well here. The key to this is not to throw too much at people all at once. The key is to create words, neologisms. I said it, a word you don't hear said a lot, you see written, neologisms. The neologisms of the post-apocalyptic fictional world. Tim Powers nails it. But the way you have to do this is you introduce words that you can kind of get a sense of the shape of. They shape the setting itself. LA is written ELLAY. At first, it didn't quite register to me what that was. I was like, why are they living in LA? But it's actually, when you think about it, it's Los Angeles, but it's written out phonetically, I guess, kind of phonetically. These little things, the jaybirds come from a type or a guy, an actual person, but then you get this slang word birdie. So these roving bands of kind of women in religious states, but they're also extremely burned out on this particular type of drug that's made called blood. They're called jaybirds, and when they act really weird, they're considered birdie. It's a perfect balance of not overburdening the reader with this new vocabulary. Think about A Clockwork Orange. That would be a book that overburdens you with so many different types of words that it's almost not transparent anymore. Now, it does create a kind of definite thick setting, but it's difficult to get through. This gets that perfect and exactly right. Now, I think that this would be of the most interest to people who either live in or have a lot of experience living around the Los Angeles area. I think I've never been to Los Angeles besides the airport, but I think that there are probably things that I missed here in terms of the geography of the area. I know they talk about like different power centers and cults living in places like Irvine. I don't really know where that is. I vaguely think that the Los Angeles Raiders used to have a stadium there or something, But what I'm saying is, if you're a California person, if you've lived in Venice, Los Angeles, I think there's probably more in here that you'll get from it than someone like me, who is a man from the South. So there's another fun aspect of this, which is not only is the bounty hunter pursuing his quarry, he is being in turn pursued by something called a hemoglobin, which is, and this is where you get kind of these science fiction elements that come in. These are supposedly these kind of, no one really has seen them that much at first. Everything's kind of a rumor because we're living in a world that's broken down, where there's no communication, where literacy is pretty much plummeted. People are just putting up signs that vaguely have letters in the old language. It seems like people can't really read anymore. But yeah, this is I don't want to give it away because I actually would recommend people picking this up. You don't have to rush out and buy it. But if you see it and you're interested in something like this, it's definitely a recommend. I've never read a Tim Powers book I wouldn't recommend. I think there's also an anti-cult angle here, you see. And I think this comes from probably people in the 80s looking at the wreckage of the 1960s and the 1970s, especially if you're a Los Angeles native on the West Coast in California. You would have more experience than someone from the Midwest or South with these kind of cults that came out of the 1960s. So that's, again, another very Los Angeles setting, a very California setting. And Tim Powers does a lot in California and Los Angeles. I've read a book of his short stories. Many of them are set in Los Angeles. So again, Los Angelinos should check this book out. But I think this anti-cult thing also comes from probably the Jim Jones thing that occurred in the 70s. This is the mid 80s. So a lot of that is still fresh in people's minds. And, into the 90s, we still get these cults. I think the people that were wearing the Nikes and killed themselves in their bunk beds and they cut their balls off and all that stuff, the Star People or whatever, I don't remember what their name is, they were California too. I mean, California, I think, in a lot of people's minds, when people think of cults, people think of California. That is blended into this book, into this post-apocalyptic setting really well. You get that sense from Powers, but it never becomes preachy. There's nothing that's preachy about it or particularly didactic about any of Tim Powers' books that I have seen, though I haven't read all of them. I do think that the turn to science fiction, because ultimately, I'm not going to give away any of the plot, actually. This is one of those books where I think, I don't want to give any of the plot away. I will just say, things become more and more science fiction. There's a long passage which is almost experimental in its writing. It's, 3 or 4 pages. We see there is something interplanetary at work here. Intergalactic, maybe. We're not really sure. And the source of this evil isn't something as simply mundane as a cult leader or a person who is able to take over a quasi-governmental structure in the midst of a post-apocalyptic world. It is something even worse and more evil. Isn't exactly the right word because it seems like a strange word to talk about when you talk about science fiction in this way. It's not exactly religious, but one of the aspects that is a bit of a problem here is that we have a fairly, a skilled protagonist, a person who is retired from this work of being a bounty hunter, but at the same time, he's not particularly overpowered, and we don't see any particular superhuman attributes of the man. And he takes on and defeats an entity which one would think is a little bit overmatched to one man's ability. But in a way, that's the story of the Western. That is the heroic individual going out, and you definitely see this. This is a heroic individual man going outside of the sheltered city, because there still is a kind of sheltered city in the remnants of Los Angeles with some protection, with some government. Going out into the wilderness, Rivas does, and having an adventure and a successful, violent action adventure. That is the Western. That is this. I guess I would just say that because we find out that the antagonist is so powerful in a way. The way that it resolves in the final kind of battle at Deviant's palace is a little bit, it just seems a little bit strange that it would end up that way. Did it bother me a great deal? No. But by the end of the book, I was ready to see it concluded regardless of how it got concluded. Again, enjoyable. I'm going to keep reading Tim Powers. That's about it. Dinner at Deviant's Palace, another one of the 80s genre books, which I really enjoyed. I got lucky. Found a lot there that I liked. A last couple little trivia bits about Powers. I said earlier he won the Philip K. Dick Award. He knew Philip K. Dick. Again, he lived in Los Angeles for a long period of time, lived in California for a long period of time. I believe he still lives out there. So he knew Philip K. Dick personally, and Philip K. Dick put Tim Powers in one or more of his books. I can't remember. I think it was just the character Dave, maybe. I'm not sure. Don't come here for facts, but come here for a little bit mysteries. I think that it was Dave in the Philip K. Dick books. Tim Powers is no stranger to Los Angeles, to California, to the way that place works, to the subterranean energies that run through it, and to personal relationships with people, which we still associate with that area, 70s, 80s, and even 1960s science fiction, fantasy, all of that. That's about it. Like, subscribe. I'll see you next time.